All right. Well, greetings, everyone. We'll see how it goes tonight. Our area of Fort Wayne, at least, is having big thunderstorms for the next half an hour or more. And we lost internet once, and we got it back, and so we're connected right now. If God willing, we'll have it the whole time. If God forbid, we I disappear altogether and don't restart and come back on, then I've lost the internet for the evening. So we'll do our best. And other people in the area may be having issues with that as well, because there's a big thunderstorms fronts moving all through here. But thank you for those who are here tonight and joining me for another inner hour. I appreciate it. Let's hope that um, you know that things sustain so we can do this together tonight. I'm going to take a moment and just pause and light my candle and try to focus on being present and not stressed on everything, all losing power. We lost all our power for a brief second, and then we lost the internet, and then finally the Wi-Fi rebooted and seemed to be okay. Now we'll see. Anyway, so give yourself a moment if you need one like I do before we start. Okay, we got this one going, so yay. Mm. All right. Again, apologies. One last thing I need to fix on a light that went out, and I'll be right back. Okie dokie, we're back. So welcome here. So we're still continuing on with our What Jesus and His Apostles Really Taught series, and we're still actually on the Didache. I think all of you, most of you anyway, were here last week. The Didache is just a brief summary. The Didache is an ancient document that was written about quite a bit in first and second century, but archaeologists had never found it. And then it was actually discovered intact in the late 1870s. And so now we have it. And Didache is a Greek word. It was written in Greek, and it means the teachings. The official title is the teachings of the 12 apostles. And by all accounts, this document was created um, during the time when Jesus was already gone. He was killed, and his brother James had taken over the movement. And then there was a series of successors after James himself was killed, which is another story. There's a whole family lineage of Jesus' family and some of his 12 apostles as well, continuing to take over the leadership of the movement. And the this is supposedly a collection of like a manual that they put together for people that were not part of the Jesus movement originally and may not have even been Jewish originally and wanted to join. And this manual was here's it kind of in two sections. Here's what we believe. And if you don't believe this, you're not going to fit. And oh, I just am now hearing my cat, who is hidden away and now stuck in the office. So I'm going to have to let her out in a moment because, anyway, the so it's a lovely night so far. But the second part was certain practices that they felt were really important and for people in the community to know what they were. So give me just a moment and we'll see if we can get the cat to go out so she doesn't meow the whole time. Come here. There you go. So we went through quite a bit of it last week, The first part was called The Way of Life, and we described a number of things about that. Um, and by the way, as you've seen, if you were here last week, there's a lot of interesting parallels, very direct parallels, sometimes word for word quotes, between much of what's in this document and much of what is in the New Testament about Yeshua. Especially, there's a section in the New Testament called Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And it's kind of a catch-all or summary or overview of Yeshua's core teachings about things. And it's in very much very close agreement to everything in the Didache. So scholars, almost all of them, I work with some of them. I shouldn't say I work with them. I'm part of some of their study groups. I don't work with them, but uh, but most of them are convinced that this is a legitimate document that did exist in late first century Israel and that was part of the community of way pre-Christian, way pre-Christian, pre-church. This was when it was still a Jewish movement, and they were still actually teaching and sharing what Yeshua taught, which the later church mostly doesn't. And it's mostly based on Paul's teachings, which were antithetical in many ways to those of the apostles and Yeshua himself. That's another story. So we did the Way of Life last time. It's a very easy document to find, by the way. You can look at it online, you can download it, you can get it in books. It's a fairly straightforward. Most of the translations are in close agreement because it's kind of standard Greek and it's not difficult to find. Whether you agree with the teachings or not is a whole other issue. And the point in this particular series is not Um, well, I don't agree with that. Well, okay, you don't need to. I'm not trying to convince you to agree with it, but this is what they believed, at least as much as we can know so far. And it is very much in agreement with other things written about Jesus in that time period, like the Gospels, and also like non-biblical sources, like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip, um, like some of the writings of letters that have been found in that era, and also historians that wrote about him, like Josephus and Philo and other first century, for the most part, Jewish historians who wrote about Yeshua and wrote about John the Baptist as well. So enough of the background. So we're in the section now of the Didache that's now called the second part of the Way of Death. So the first part is called the Way of Life. So here we go. So, and since you don't have copies of this, I'm just reading it to you. The Way of Death is actually quite short. The Way of Life was pretty long if you were here last week. Well, it was long if you were here last week or not, but you heard it if you were here last week. So it's already talked about the Way of Life and gone through all of those things and several um, aspects of the first and second commandment as taught by Yeshua. So this is the way of death. The way of death, I'm quoting now, the way of death is this. First of all, it is evil and full of curses. And then there's like a space, which most translators put a colon in there because this is kind of a list or an explanation of what was just said. And it's rather long. Murder, adultery, lust, promiscuity, theft, idolatry, magical arts, witchcraft, robbery, false testimony, hypocrisy, duplicity, treachery, pride, malice, stubbornness, greed, foul language, jealousy, arrogance, and boasting. Persecutors of good men, hating truth, loving lies, dealing in lies, not knowing the true reward of righteousness, not adhering to either what is good or even to good judgment, alert and attentive rather to evil than to good, not gentle or patient, loving worthless things, pursuing selfish rewards, not having mercy on the poor, not working for the downtrodden or the oppressed, not recognizing the God who made them, murderers of children, corrupters of the entire creation, turning away from the needy, oppressing the afflicted, advocates of the rich, unjust judges of the poor. In other words, sinful in every way. My children, may you be delivered from all of these things. That's it. That's the complete section on the way of death, which is very, very short compared to several pages on what the way of life was all about. Then the third and final section of the Didache is actually on practices. And there are primarily three practices that are well, really four. Depends on how you break them up. Because they're not subheaded in any of these ancient texts. It's all just text. And then we these days break them up into numbering them and lettering them and naming sections and stuff for easier reference for our sake. But so the basic topics that are talked about in the actual practices that people were expected to learn and adhere to if they wanted to be part of the community. And this community, by the way, may be unlike our frame of reference now. We probably have a frame of reference of, say, for example, the Christian church, proselytizing, trying to get new members, trying to persuade people toward their belief system, trying to convert people to Christianity or convert people to Islam or convert people to, whatever. That was not the way in the Yeshua movement. It was not a movement that was actively um, seeking to change what people believed. It was a movement that was bringing a way of life teaching, and anyone who was interested in that way of life was welcome to learn about it. But if you didn't want to live in that way of life or refused to live that way of life, then you either could not be part of the community or you were excluded from the community. It was open to everyone, but only if you adhered to their standards. Otherwise, it wasn't. So the first one has to do with food. And there's a lot remember, this is a Jewish movement, and there's a lot of regulations and laws in the Torah about food and what we now call, what they call the kosher diet, and things that are acceptable in diet and things that are not acceptable in diet. Um, Jesus did not change any of that. He did not. He didn't change any of the laws of Moses. He didn't advocate anybody not follow the laws of Moses. He certainly did not abandon kosher diet himself or his apostles by any accounts we have of them, and did not advocate abandoning kosher diet. What he did do was, when Jewish debates happened, which they happened back then just like they do now. One of the very old sayings is if you have two rabbis, you have at least three opinions. So there was a lot of debate about how to interpret the teachings and how to apply the teachings. And so when he engaged in some of these debates in the New Testament, one of the questions came up about, well, is it sinful to eat this? Well, will this keep you from the kingdom? And so if you eat that or don't eat this. And one of the things he did say was, nothing that goes into your mouth defiles a person. It's what comes out of your heart and mind that defiles a person. So he did not teach or believe that food was uh, that the kosher diet was essential for spiritual awareness or for a personal relationship with God or for any of those things. It was advocated because it was the best way of living for health purposes and for um, what we would probably call ecology today, although of course they didn't have that concept. And there's, I won't get into this because it's not part of the Didache, but I will mention that there's growing biblical historical evidence, which we did not used to have a few years ago, that vegetarianism was much more widely practiced than we believed in that era, and especially by a couple of different communities, one of whom was the Essene group that we've done other classes about, and one of whom was the Yeshua group. Um, Not that they required that, uh, but well, some of the Essene groups did require it, but Yeshua did not require it. But it seems to have been fairly prevalently practiced. If you're not familiar with Judaism today as it's practiced in all its variants, kosher diet is still a thing, and one of the easiest ways to practice kosher diet, if you're traveling or if you're not in a Jewish area where you can readily find kosher foods, if you practice vegetarianism, it's automatically kosher. So you're not mixing any of the forbidden things or eating any of the forbidden things if you eat vegetarian. So particularly in teachers with itinerant ministries like John the Baptist and Yeshua and others of their era, there's a likelihood they practiced vegetarianism at least when they were traveling and possibly all the time. But here's all it says about food in the Didache. It says, now, concerning eating, observe our traditions as best you can. Well, our traditions here mean the Jewish kosher laws. Um, and so that's what they're talking about. Observe them as best you can. So it is still recommending the kosher laws. And it says, but in any case, do not eat meat sacrificed to idols or worshiping dead gods, which is not really a thing, in most of the cultures we live in today over here in the West. Uh, it is in other parts of the world, but the the in most of Jewish history in the land of Israel, or even before the land of Israel, they were surrounded by neighbors who were, particularly in the early days, pre-Jesus and up to about that period, they were surrounded by neighbors who did things like practice living child sacrifice and drink the blood of children, literally, and things like that. So participating in worship of false gods meant things like eating meat sacrificed, often the meat of children or blood of children. It also meant things like engaging in sexual orgies and things of that nature that were part of the Moloch worship and the Baal worship and a number of other of these pagan, shall we say, traditions. Uh, that was not okay to participate in that. That's all it says about food in the Didache. Don't do that. Then it has things that Yeshua practiced that the apostles continued. One of them was baptism, and so there's a section on that. And here's what the apostles supposedly, at least in this document, taught. And it says, concerning baptism, baptize in this way. Having been instructed in all the teachings, then baptize the candidate in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in living, running water. That is a Jewish practice again. It's called mikvah. And mikvah was not a one-time baptism. It was an ongoing series of ritual water purifications. And the mikvah had to be in living bodies of water, like in a river, for example, which is where John the Baptist would baptize people. Or they would build mikvahs. They look like small swimming pools, sometimes large swimming pools. And they had a water source, typically a river or a stream, that would have an inlet into the pool that would hold the body of water, and then an outlet with valves that they could control. So there's always water in the pool, but it was living water, and it literally didn't stay forever in the pool. It moved in and out of the pool, so it was moving or living water. Okay. And then it says, but if you do not have access to running water, then baptize in any other water. And if you cannot find cold water, use warm. So that's I'll let you do whatever you want with that. But if you have neither, then simply pour water over the head 3 times. So you can see right there the Christian variant of that, where some churches do full immersion in actual lakes or rivers. Some do full immersion in baptismal founts in their church. And some just do sprinkling, as it's called, of pouring a little bit of water on the top of the head. All of those derive from this, and all of those practices are mentioned in the Didache. Um, but they're preferred ones. And if you can't do the preferred one, you keep going down into the less preferred one. Then it says, before baptism, let both the baptizer and the candidate fast, and any others who will be participating with them, who are able to fast. The fast should last at least a day, preferably 2. So fasting was also a regular part of their practice back then. Then it says concerning fasting, do not let your fasts fall in the same days as the hypocrites do, for they fast on Mondays and Thursdays. Keep your fast days to Wednesdays and Fridays. So I wish I could tell you that I knew the history of that and what that referred to. It probably wouldn't be that hard to research, but I've just never done it. I don't know what that clearly it refers to something that was going on back then. Don't know what group they're talking about. Don't know why those days matter, but it's in there. Also, on the next section is on prayer. Concerning prayer, do not pray as the hypocrites do. By the way, if you're familiar with the New Testament, um, Jesus rarely criticizes anybody. People do all kinds of things that are not good according to Mosaic law, and he doesn't judge them or chastise them. He may suggest corrections or he may advocate corrections, but he doesn't typically attack people, except for one group of people. He attacks them consistently and throughout the whole New Testament, and it's people he calls hypocrites. Most often, they're people in religious authority that he thinks are not living what they're teaching. But it was not limited just to them. So hypocrisy is a big deal in the Jewish movement. Concerning prayer, do not pray as the hypocrites pray, but pray as our Lord commanded us. And then it literally quotes word for word, the common Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. It's just all there. The difference is that in Protestant Bibles, when you get to the verse about deliver us from evil, only the Protestant Bibles say that. The Catholic Bible does not say that. The Ethiopian Bible does not say that. And the Didache does not say that. Because in the original Greek and Hebrew, it did not say that. What it actually says, quite literally, is deliver us from the evil one. It's not talking about some generic force or energy. It's talking about a specific, the evil one. And it's so generally speaking, that's been interpreted by most scholars to mean the one that's called Satan, Ha-Satan in Hebrew, which means the adversary, or could be called the accuser. And so that's another whole story altogether, but it specifically is talking about that, not some kind of evil, indiscriminate, impersonal energy of some kind. And then it says, pray this 3 times a day. So the Jews prayed the Shema back then, which was a central prayer of Judaism, 3 times a day. And the Jewish followers of Yeshua also added the Lord's Prayer, this one, to be done 3 times a day as well, with the Shema. Okay, moving on to the last part. The last part is about the Eucharist, which sometimes called the Lord's Supper. Concerning Eucharist thanksgiving, this is the way we give thanks. So this is describing how their community did it. The Eucharist was not something Jesus invented. It was a Jewish ritual that goes way back, not only to Moses, but way back to the days of Abraham. And the person that actually instituted all this was Melchizedek. It's in Genesis 14. Melchizedek is a very interesting figure, which we're not going to get into tonight, but a remarkable figure. And more extraordinary things are said about him in the Bible than Jesus actually, or Moses. But Melchizedek began what was then later throughout Judaism known as the Order of Melchizedek, which, believe it or not, still exists. But that's not historical. That's me just telling you that. Um, so, so we give thanks in this way, and the process involved bread and wine. Um, the the wine being liquid and taking whatever shape and color of its container, or at least the shape of it, was uh, representative of spirit, and the bread representative of physical or body. So back to the dedicate. Concerning the cup. So this is what you say with the cup at the Thanksgiving. We give thanks to you, Father, for the holy vine of your son David, whom you have made known to us through your son Yeshua. Yours is the glory of all ages. So the line of David was a messianic line in Judaism, who is not only a spiritual leader, or we might say spiritual teacher, but was also literally bloodline-wise the rightful physical king of the nation of Israel. And throughout the prophets and the New Testament, the line of David and the Messiah is a very important theme. Okay, going on. As regards to the broken bread, we give thanks to you, Father, for the life and knowledge which you've made known to us through your Son, Yeshua. Yours is the glory of the ages. As this broken bread was scattered upon the mountains, and then gathered, became one, so may your followers be gathered together from the ends of the earth into your kingdom. Yours is the power and glory unto the ages. Do not let anyone eat or drink of this Eucharist who has not already been baptized in the name of the Lord. For the Lord said, do not give what is holy unto the dogs. That's a direct quote from Yeshua in the New Testament. After you have been filled, then Jews, I know we're kind of used to, if you're used to it all, saying grace before meals. The Jewish tradition also had, well, I won't go into all the details, but was a blessing after the meal as well. That's what this is talking about. After you have been filled, then give thanks as follows. We give thanks to you, Holy Father, for your holy name, which you have made to dwell in our hearts, and for the knowledge, faith, and immortality that you have made known to us and revealed to us through Yeshua. Yours is the glory of the ages. You, our Father, created all things for your name's sake, and gave food and drink to men for their enjoyment, that they might give you thanks. And you have given us spiritual food and spiritual drink and eternal life as well. Most of all, we give thanks that you are powerful. Yours is the kingdom and the glory from age to age throughout the ages. Lord, may you remember your holy followers, this community, and deliver it from all evil and perfect it in your love. That's the end of the dedicate. So before I just, and you're welcome to comment anytime, but before I stop and just ask if there are comments or questions, one really interesting thing about this document, it's an early document in the sense that it was almost definitely before the end of the end of the first century. And it was a very direct remnant of the earliest followers of teaching and teachings of Yeshua, including his family and apostles. And in it, if you notice, there is not one statement about the need to believe Jesus is your Savior. Not one. There is not one statement in it about Jesus being the only begotten Son of God and the Savior of all mankind. Not one. There is not one statement in it that if you believe the right thing, you go to heaven, and if you believe the wrong thing, you go to hell. Not one. th- this is about here's how we look at things. These are things that lead to life. These are things that lead to death in a spiritual sense, not just a physical sense. These are things that we believe. And these are what we're teaching. This is the core of what we're teaching. And here's how we live. We live in fellowship. We live with an attitude of gratefulness and thankfulness. Um, we praise God as the creator of all things and the sustainer of all things. And when people want to enter the community, they have to agree to these standards and want to do this. And then they're baptized in this way. And then we have a common meal, sometimes called the Feast of Love, and we share that with one another. And this is the format by which we share it. That's it. That's it. There's nothing about heaven and hell in there. Nothing about the need to believe in Jesus. And so theologically and biblically to scholars, it's a very interesting document because it proves that very early on, the people we know were most directly connected to Yeshua, his family, and his initial apostles. In one of their earlier documents, are not proclaiming that people need to believe in Jesus and not teaching heaven and hell. So if it were as important as the church, today's church has told us, it's really hard to believe it wouldn't have been somewhere in those documents, and it's not. So um, I find that interesting. Um, so that's the Didache. I want to say next week, my plan, God willing, my voice is a little shot. I'm recovering from a nasty cold here, so pardon the coughs and whatnot. But next week, I'm planning on talking about a group called the Ebionites, and you probably never heard of them, but we now know, and by now I mean in the last 10 to 20 years mostly, there's been so much new documentary evidence discovered in archaeology and biblical research that we know a lot more than we used to about after. We know a lot in the New Testament, what happened in the course of Jesus' life and how did he die. We know next to nothing about what happened after that. And so now we know a lot more about what happened and how the movement continued after that. It did not continue by him saying, okay, Peter and Paul are now in charge of my church. And then there's going to be a direct apostolic line set up through the Catholic Church, and all the popes are my immediate successors. That is how it did not happen historically. Biblical scholars don't even argue about that. Um, the Catholic Church still does, but biblical scholars don't. And I'm not bashing the church. There's a lot of good things in all human institutions and a lot of bad things in all human institutions. So the church has done some tremendous good, without doubt, in our history. But the claim of it originating with Jesus appointing Peter and Paul as his successors and them then starting the church uh, did not happen like that. The movement did continue, and it was given to his brother James, and he took it over until he himself was martyred. Um, and then a group formed out of all that. And so we'll get into that more next week that you may or may not have heard of. But again, is factual and it's available out there, and there are scholars teaching it. So Ani, I see a hand up, even though it says my name on it, but it's you, I think. So go ahead.
Yes, I think one of the things that struck me is about the way of life and the way of death. And and it seems to me that those delineate the way a community lives and dies. Just like I know that certain
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
monasteries or nunneries had different orders had different rules.
Yeah.
They wore certain clothes. They had vow of poverty, not all of them, but many of them. Um, they had a different schedule. I mean, they had different requirements. And I think that any community, whether it's a religious community or a secular community, in order to continue to live, needs to have a defined, this is who we are and this is what we do.
Yeah.
And those rules don't strike me as all that difficult to follow. Just, be most of them, not all of them, most of them are just be nice to other people. You know,
Yeah,
that's
or the way Yeshua put it in the New Testament, love fulfills all the laws and the prophets.
yes,
I mean, it's just
yes.
that's it. So
And
yeah.
if you're uh, we being human need to have a little more uh detail given to us apparently. And it seems like the way of life and the way of death listed in there is like, if you do this, everybody gets along better. If you do this, you're all happier. And if you do this, you are indeed physically healthier
Hmm.
and mentally healthier. Um, and don't take things that are, if it's not yours, don't touch it, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
Um, don't be mean to people. It definitely seems like that's not just, I mean, the way of life and the way of death work for individuals and communities as well.
really good point. Yeah, really good point. Um, and as terms of how what you just said, another interesting thing that a lot of people maybe don't ever consider, the 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 growth of the Jesus movement, of course, initially started with Yeshua, but really it didn't. It initially started with John the Baptist. He had a huge following, and Jesus was part of that following. Then when John was killed, Jesus took over. And then Jesus added a lot through his own teachings. But what we think of as the burgeoning, the big growth in the Jesus movement occurred mostly after his death. And the reason most people were kind of clamoring to be part of that movement was not their theology, and it was not their philosophical teachings or their views of heaven and hell, which are almost outside the writings of Paul, are rarely talked about in the early Jewish movement writings. The uh, the reason people were flocking to that community was the way they lived. They were happy people. They got along together. They trusted each other. They shared things in common. They helped each other out. They were kind of like a neighborhood you wish you could live in. It was like, wow, this and people loved that. They felt loved, they felt cared for, they felt respected, they felt safe in that community. Everybody helped each other out. That was not common. That was absolutely not a common experience in that era. I'm not so sure it's common in ours anymore either that much, but it was very appealing to people, and especially in light of the Roman occupation and harshness and the uncertainty and violence around them everywhere. Finding a community of people that actually cared about each other and were happy was huge. It wasn't really philosophical or theological attractiveness that really drew people at that point. And it was mostly the lives of the apostles and their families and their community that the way they lived that really drew people in. So
And
anyway,
I've
go
got my
ahead.
hand up again.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think that you hit on something there when you were talking about that's what attracted people. I think that that is still true today. I think most of the spiritual community that we enjoy here in the Midwest,
Mm,
or that we enjoy with our extended community, some of which are on here tonight, is because we extend that welcome to people, and we let them know we're not into proselytizing. We're just willing to share our our philosophy of the way of life, I guess.
mhm,
And I think about how many people that we've had when we used to have the center, or going to Unity, or going to Brigade, or up to Michigan, and people talking about, I just feel accepted here. I can just be myself. I know people here care about me.
mm.
Um, I think people anywhere on the planet are looking for to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
seen and accepted and cared for.
mhm, yeah.
So
Uh, I agree with you. And And some other people are sending little hearts up. Yeah, I agree with that. And uh, uh, so I think that I think that there's a I think it addresses a real need people have. And one of the things that a teacher of mine told me, actually a philosophy prof of mine told me many years ago that I found very interesting. He said, you know, if you look at most Christian depictions of Jesus, most of them, particularly Middle Ages and particularly the Catholics, but most of them, if you see any depictions of him, um, he mostly looks miserable. He's, you know, it's the suffering servant thing, and he mostly looks sad or depressed, or he looks miserable, like he's suffering. And and in various places in the Gospels, it says that whenever Jesus was someplace and there were children around, the children flocked to him and would climb on his lap and want to be with him. And children do not flock to depressing, somber, um, you know, morose people. They just don't. And so I think the image that Jesus walked around always serious and always depressed and the world's ending and God hates you unless you believe in me and all those kind of things is just totally false. I think he was a very joy-filled, radiant individual that people were attracted to just by what he emanated, let alone before he even started speaking. And and I think that I think that's still true today. If you have a gathering of people or a family reunion or whatever, and you have some really depressed, sad, upset-looking people, children aren't flocking over to sit by them. They're flocking over to the happy, you know, carefree people who see them and interact with
Neither am I. I'm
them.
not
Right,
flocking
right, exactly.
either.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither. Anyway, I'll be quiet now. Anybody else? Comments, questions so far? Um, oh yes, Nahama Shirley, please.
It's me again. I was just, you were talking about love, and what came up for me was Rabbi Akiva, who
Yeah.
said that, the Song of Songs is a metaphor for God's love for people,
Mm-hmm.
for his creation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that it's about love. And so we had to look it up because I couldn't remember how close to the Jesus' death Rabbi Akiva
Oh.
lived.
Oh, right, right.
Because it would be interesting to know if that was a common teaching, not common, but
Yes.
more usual than we would expect. I mean, it's being taught today, but people don't know it, you
Yeah,
know.
right, exactly, exactly. And I think it was. I think you're right. And Akiva certainly was. And
He came later, a
and
little
even
bit,
yeah, no, well, he wasn't in yeah, he came right after Yeshua, you know,
right.
and was killed by the same Roman system that killed Jesus. Um,
Yeah.
the the even in our era, um, Reb Zalman, for example, with whom a lot of you except these guys probably won't know, but Reb Zalman was an amazing person. And I'd heard about him from David and from Shlomo and from all these different people for years. And we finally got to meet him, thank God, you know, before he passed. And and he actually had a private session with him, which was awesome. But in meeting him, again, what I was impressed with was not his Torah knowledge, which was extensive, or his teaching ability, which was also remarkable, but the love you felt around him and how you felt as soon as you looked at him, you felt like he really saw you and he really cared about you. You know, it's just like, wow, this guy's great. And I just could have sat and listened to him for ages, you know. So yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, Uncle Stephen,
Hmm.
do you have to do two pokes very
Sure,
quickly?
sure,
One
sure.
is Santi, and I hope she's purring for the thunderstorm because we had a very weird storm yesterday it was more buildup than anything. It got dark, it got windy, it thundered a bit, and then it poured for about a minute, and then it was over.
Yeah.
Very weird. And secondly, James, we saw the Odyssey on Tuesday. It was good. Highly recommend it. And no, I did not see it in IMAX because I get motion sickness. But still, regular standard version, it was good. It's probably one of the best versions I've seen of the Odyssey.
Wow.
So I highly recommend it, even though it's 3 hours long. But yes.
Thanks, Shirley. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Lance, go right ahead, bud.
On
Oh,
war.
sorry, say it again. I missed it, Shirley. Go ahead.
Interesting view on war and the
Ah.
act.
This particular version.
Yeah.
I'm eager to look at that. I haven't seen that one yet. So
Mm.
thank you. I love your movie updates. They're helpful to me because I love movies. Let's do Lance first, and then we'll go over to James. Oh, I thought never mind, James. I will go to you if you want, but the hand I saw was by Lance, not you. But let's
Oh,
do
Lance
Lance.
can go.
I guess
Is Lance here? He
Yeah.
can go.
I guess there was a finger click or a butt dial. The finger dial. I don't know. I just got here, man.
Okay. Well, anyway, you have a hand up by
So
you, so yeah.
But hey,
Okay, so
all right,
well,
all right,
welcome
thank
here,
you.
Lance. Yeah. Oh, you know what? You don't, and now your hand is gone. That's weird. Anyway, welcome here. So, James, you're up. Go ahead, buddy.
Okay. Um, just wanted to kind of did. Oh, for Shuli, I'm wearing a T-shirt for Schrodinger's cat. Uh, there you
I'm
go.
wondering what shirt you were wearing.
Yeah,
Nice.
my wife got me that for Christmas.
Nice.
But kind of building on, and thank you for the reference to the Odyssey. Once it comes out on video, or whatever they do nowadays, I'll look at it. Well, I did want to kind of pile on with what Annie said
Mhm.
about, like, especially Midwesterners, because I've been to Michigan since last Saturday, and I'm going to be here another few days. And I brought my wife up here for the first time, and she just fell in love with the place. And everyone has just been so nice. And I think you're right. It's just you want to live in these communities, in these small town communities. So that's the equivalent of it now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
where I live, and with there's 2 million people in the area, and we're all stacked up on each other, and we're too busy getting each other out of the way.
Right.
For to really enjoy our life. So no, it's a much different thing, and I think that has a very powerful draw.
Mhm.
And the other thing I would say about the Christianity is there are two elements of it. There was in the early Christianity, because I'm reading Bevan's book on Hellenism and Christianity,
Mhm.
talks about the cheerfulness of it, but it also talks about the more apocalyptic too.
Yep.
So there's a duality of early Christianity, especially back then when they were thinking, well, geez, the whole world's going to end in tomorrow.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, that just kind of made sense.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think in regards to the apocalyptic thing, we've not really talked about that in any depth in these classes, but um, I don't think people today have any realization of how widespread apocalyptic view was during the era of Jesus and how bad things were for people back then. And they really did think, the end was, like you said, tomorrow or next week or when, like right away. It was coming quickly. And so and if you really think that, I mean, if you're really convinced that the entire world as you know it is going to end and a completely different thing is going to happen, it really changes how you behave, and what your priorities are. So anyway, yeah, thank you for that, James. Lois, go ahead. I'm not hearing anything, Lois, and I don't see you either.
Hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Don't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, I thought Anna was next. That's Not, no?
Not on mine, no, but we can go to Anna next if she has something, sure.
Okay. So I just want to comment that the one by one community impresses me like our modern times, similar to the Essenes.
Mm, mm.
And the like mindedness, it's study, it had another term and I lost it already. Um, we're there for each other. We respect each other. We don't judge, if this person doesn't agree, kind of thing.
Mhm.
That's what I love about it. And I think it's probably similar to what I've read on the Essenes because they were very closely knit and they had all these rituals and different things, right?
They
And so
were, yes, they were very close. Yeah.
we don't have the rituals, but we have the community,
Mhm,
community
mhm,
and the like-mindedness,
mhm.
and it's safe and free to talk. Where some places it's not. Can't be yourself. Some places.
Very true. Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Stephen and Ani.
Yeah, thank you, Lois. That's
And James, we did not pay her to say that to entice you to the Midwest.
I'll talk to you later about that.
But if but if you feel enticed to the Midwest because she said that, I just want to let you know that we all feel that way and you would be quite welcome in this area.
Oh
absolutely.
no, I'm coming back 2 or 3 years. I'm gonna be up here. So
Woohoo.
Okay.
yep.
Sooner would be better.
No, I
Also,
can't. I gotta wait for my son to graduate college.
Oh, yeah. I get it. I do get that. I do. It definitely rearranges the timeline there. Yep.
All
Makes
right.
sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
oh, sorry, go ahead, James. Keep going.
Real quick, I forgot. Thanks to Nakama for talking about Rabbi Akiva. I've seen a book on him, and that means I'm gonna buy it. So thank you.
Let us
He,
know what
yeah, he
Yep, I will.
really was an incredibly influential rabbi in Judaism. And interestingly enough, did not even start learning anything about Judaism until he was 40 years old. So remarkable guy. But um, yeah, also I want to mention to everybody because my brain is not always on target. I want to, when we end tonight, I want to have a special prayer for a moment for James's aunt, and I invite you all to join me in that. But we're going to wrap up that way tonight when we get to that point, and I don't want to forget it. So, Ani or any of you, if I don't get to that for any reason at all, just remind me because I really want to do that. So. Okay, let's see. Somebody, oh, yes. So Anna, Lois thought you had something to say, so do you?
No, I'm a listener tonight.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for being here and listening. Yeah, so well, I'll stop again in a second. Anybody else have anything you'd like to ask or share before I add one more thing? Alrighty. So there are some discoveries, let's say, that have come out of both biblical archaeology that are discoveries from actual digs, archaeological digs and finds. And then there are discoveries that biblical scholars are making as they find and translate more uh, first and second century documents, which has been going on a lot. So they're having a clearer and clearer picture of things that were happening back then. And one of the things that we know was that the Jesus movement didn't die after Jesus' death, and it also did not become the Christian church right after his death. Um, so I want to just mention this briefly for those of you interested in that. And there are lots of really good books explaining this process. But when Paul started teaching, Um, he, to the best of our evidentiary knowledge, never met Jesus in the flesh ever. And he began teaching about Yeshua based on a visionary experience he had. And he thought that visionary experience was more important and carried more authority than did the word of the 12 apostles who Jesus personally chose and trained for 3.5 years. And what he taught was not consistent with what they taught. And throughout their lifetimes, they were at odds with each other, the 12 apostles and Paul. I'm not saying they were, um, well, they actually were sometimes actually physically hostile to each other, but they did not philosophically or theologically get along. And the apostles were always upset that Paul was teaching something as if it were what Yeshua taught, when it not only isn't what he taught, but it was antithetical to what he taught. And so there were a lot of arguments about that. Some of that in a much toned down form, because remember, the New Testament was written years later to present one rather singular viewpoint on Jesus and excluded every other thing that existed at the time that didn't support that particular viewpoint. So the New Testament is very favorable toward Paul, and about 2/3 of it, or well over half, is written by Paul. So it's pretty favorable to Paul. And the book of Acts, which is very favorable to Paul, because it's written by Luke, who was one of Paul's students, um, even that preserves some of this antagonism and animosity between the apostles and Paul. So there's a lot in the book of Acts about that, about this dissension. But basically, the Jesus that we know through the modern church, also through the ancient Catholic Church, is the Jesus Paul taught, not the Jesus the apostles taught, which is quite different. So what do we have left today of what the apostles actually taught of Jesus? The answer is almost nothing. The Didache is one for sure that we have. But we do know some of the stream of history that occurred beyond that. And that's what I'll get into more next week. But the just in terms of succession, so you have an idea of historically how this unfolded. Before Jesus died, James, his brother, was somebody that was a key person in their movement. New evidence indicates he was at the Last Supper along with Yeshua's family and not just his 12 apostles, which would make sense actually from a Jewish traditional standpoint for sure. And in non-canonical gospels, Yeshua says flat out that people should go to James after he dies, that he's going to take over the movement, which he did. So James was a successor to the movement. And there's a whole lot about where he operated from and who were his key administrators that we also now know. And then when James himself was martyred and killed, uh, the uh, the successor after him was Simeon, and Simeon was Yeshua's first cousin. So his successor was first his brother, and then after that, his first cousin. And then down the line, for 15 different people, historically, we know, we have lists of these from early letters we found. We know who the successors were of the movement. There are 15 of them that we know. And after that, it kind of disperses and gets real cloudy, and we're not so sure. But that's quite a long time. And one of the movements that grew out of these successors was called the Ebionites. And it's Ebionites. It's a variation on Ebionim, which is a Hebrew word meaning poor ones or the poor. And we'll talk about that next week and who they were. But we know more about them now than we have in many earlier years because of new things that have been discovered and found. And we also know what happened to the movement after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, and then also what happened between there and the Second Great Jewish Revolt, which was in 135, led by Bar Kokhba, and what happened as a result of that. We know where this movement went, where its headquarters were right after Jesus. We know where it was after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple there. And then we know where it ended up during the Bar Kokhba, or Bar Kokhba was his actual name. We know where they were kind of centered. And so I'm going to get into some of that in next week. And I know the historical parts you can look up on your own. I understand you can read and you can use internet searches. So I won't just totally bore you with the history of it, but I do want to present a bit of it as a basis. But I want to show you how it kind of evolved and why that movement sort of lost out and why Paul's version of Christianity kind of came forward and the dramatic differences in understanding about God, about life and death, and about who Jesus was and wasn't, and how all that played out as these groups unfolded. So anyway, and then after that, we'll see. If there's still some interest, we'll get into greater depth. And if everybody's, like, that's enough of that stuff, we'll move on to a different series. But as always, I do appreciate some of you do write and give me comments on what we've done and or suggestions about things. I really, really appreciate that. So
Prayer.
I encourage that you would do that. Thank you, dear. So we're going to wrap up because it's 8 o'clock here. And I'd invite you to just take a moment. James has an aunt who he has been very close to. James lives in Texas. His aunt lived in southern Michigan. She lived a long and what I understand very good, full life and recently passed. James is in Michigan right now handling some of those affairs. And while she lived a long and good life, it's always hard to lose somebody you're close to. All of us have been through that. So for James and his aunt and all those people who love her, and for all of you, whether recently or long ago, have lost someone you really love, I'd just like to take a moment of quiet remembrance, first of all, of those souls that were so important to you and continue to be so important to you. And I would like to ask that the Holy Spirit bless all those who have departed, wherever they are dwelling now, whatever phase of life is unfolding for them now, that they find the peace of God within themselves and that they feel loved and cared for. And that those of us who have been left here find that same peace of God within our own hearts, even in our times of suffering and trial and loss. And that we trust that the one who made us still cares for us. And that once the earthly form is dropped, the soul goes forward. And that all bonds of love endure. It is not limited to physical space and time. And that the reality of our being has never been limited to human being. So I invite you just to take this last moment to open to a bigger picture of the interconnectedness and the ongoing connectedness. And the spirit of love that makes all that possible. So thank you, Lord, for the gift of this community of souls. Thank you for your presence within us and among us. And thank you for going with us into the new week. May it be a week of blessing, healing, and upliftment for all of us. Amen. So thank you all very much for your presence here tonight. And look forward to seeing you again next week, when hopefully all of us will be well and I will have a stronger voice because it's kind of shot tonight. But I am feeling better, so I'm on the mend. All right. Love you all. Bye.
Thanks, Stephen.
Welcome, James. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you guys.
Love you.
Love you.